There is a letter in the desk drawer of my office that no one has ever read. Not my advisors, not my colleagues, not even my closest friends. It is sealed inside an envelope, and on the front of that envelope, I wrote the names of my children in my own handwriting. I wrote that letter late at night, alone, knowing I might not live to see the next morning. That letter was written with tears I did not try to hide. And today, for the first time, I want to tell you why it exists. This is not a political speech. It is not a statement. It is not an argument. This is something far more difficult than that. Because this is not about power or policy or leadership. This is about love. This is about what it means to be a father when the path you choose may cost your children their father. My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso. But when I wrote that letter, I was not thinking about titles or positions. I was thinking about small faces lighting up when I walked through the door, small hands reaching for mine, small voices calling me by the name that matters more than any other, Papa. Before I tell you what I wrote in that letter, you need to understand why I wrote it. You need to understand what it means to lead a country where powerful interests seek influence, what it means to stand firm when pressure comes from many directions, what it means to wake up each day knowing that public responsibility can also bring personal risk. I did not seek this burden. As a boy, I did not dream of writing goodbye letters. I dreamed of a simple life, a peaceful life, a life where I could watch my children grow without wondering whether I would still be there tomorrow. But life does not always follow our plans, and faith, real faith, does not promise comfort. It asks for honesty. That night, the danger felt close, not distant, not abstract, specific, credible. My security team was taking precautions, but precautions are not guarantees. I sat alone in my office. The building was quiet. My family was asleep, and I was facing a reality no father should ever have to face. What if this is my last night? What if I never get to hold my children again? What if they grow up without ever knowing what I wanted to tell them? That thought was heavier than any fear I had known before, so I opened my desk drawer. I took out a blank sheet of paper, and I began to write. The first thing I wrote was their names, each one slowly, carefully, as if writing their names could somehow keep them close to me, as if the ink itself could hold them. Then I stopped. I stared at the empty page beneath their names, and in that silence, I understood something clearly. When you believe you may be writing your final words to your children, you do not waste ink on unimportant things. You go straight to the heart, and that is when I understood what this letter truly was, not a farewell, but a testimony of love. And what I wrote next was the hardest part of all. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank space beneath their names. I did not know where to begin. How do you put a father's love into words? How do you prepare your children for a life without you, when all you want is to be there for every moment of it? I prayed quietly, not out loud, not dramatically, just a simple request. God, give me the words. Help me say what they need to hear. Let this letter be a gift if I cannot be there myself. And then I began to write. The first thing I told them was that I loved them. Simple words, but words that needed to be written clearly, without conditions, without uncertainty. I wrote that my love for them was not something they had to earn, not something they could lose, that it existed simply because they existed. I wrote that before they were anything in this world, before they achieved anything, before they succeeded or failed at anything, they were already loved completely. I needed them to know that. Then I wrote something else. I wrote that every decision I had made, even the difficult ones, even the dangerous ones, I made while thinking about them, thinking about the world they would grow up in, thinking about the future they would inherit. I wanted them to understand that their father did not take risks carelessly, that when I stepped into danger, it was not because I valued my life less, but because I believed something larger was at stake. I wrote that I was not being reckless with my life. I was investing it in what I believed could make tomorrow better than today. But after that, I apologized. This was not easy to write. I apologized for the moments I missed, for the nights I was not there at bedtime, for the mornings I left before they woke up, for the birthdays, the school events, the small moments that seem ordinary until you realize how precious they are. I apologized for the burden my choices placed on them, for the fear they might feel when they heard threats against their father, for the confusion of growing up in a world where their papa was admired by many, but criticized by others. I wrote that I wished I could have been an ordinary father, a father who came home at the same time every evening, a father who did not need protection, a father whose biggest worry was homework or broken toys. I wrote that wish honestly, but I also wrote that I hoped one day they would understand why that was not possible, that sometimes life asks more from us than we would ever choose for ourselves, that sometimes faith and responsibility lead us down paths we did not plan but cannot ignore. I told them about their grandfather. I wrote about the values he taught me, about integrity, about courage, about standing for what is right, even when it costs you something. I wrote about our family history, about where we came from, about the generations before us who faced hardship so that we could exist. I wanted my children to know that they were part of a story larger than themselves, a story of endurance, of struggle, of faith, a story that did not begin with me and would not end with me. And then I wrote about their mother. I wrote that if anything happened to me, they should stay close to her, that she was stronger than she realized, that she would carry them through whatever darkness might come. I asked them to take care of her, to be patient with her, to remember that she would be grieving too, even as she tried to be strong for them. That part of the letter was difficult to write, because writing it meant accepting the possibility that I would not be there to help her do that. I paused again. The paper in front of me was already filled with words, but I knew something was still missing. There was something I needed to leave them that went beyond advice, beyond memories, beyond explanations, something that had carried me through my own fear that night. And that is when I began to write about faith. I wrote to them about faith, not as a lesson, not as an obligation, but as the most honest truth I knew. I wrote that there were moments in my life when nothing else held me together. Moments when plans failed, when strength was not enough, when answers did not come. And in those moments, faith was not an idea. It was a lifeline. I told them that trusting God did not mean life would be easy. It meant life would be meaningful. That faith did not remove danger, but it gave courage in the presence of danger. That it did not eliminate fear, but it taught me how to walk forward even while afraid. I wrote that this faith was the greatest inheritance I could leave them, more valuable than money, more lasting than position, more powerful than influence. I asked them not to believe simply because their father believed. I told them to seek God for themselves, to ask questions, to wrestle with doubt, to build a faith that was real, personal, and honest. I wrote that God was not distant, that he was present in quiet moments and difficult ones alike, that they could speak to him anytime, anywhere, about anything. I wrote that prayer was not only for emergencies, that it was a daily conversation, a way of staying grounded when the world felt unstable. I wrote about scripture, not as a rule book, but as a guide, a place where wisdom had been preserved through generations of uncertainty. I told them that in those pages, they would find comfort when they were hurting, direction when they were confused, and strength when they felt weak. I wrote about hope. This was important. I did not want them to believe that death, if it came, would have the final word. I wrote that I believed in eternity, that life did not end with a last breath, that love did not disappear when a heart stopped beating. I told them that if I died serving what I believed was right, I would be at peace, and that one day, if they also chose faith, we would meet again, not as a promise to escape pain, but as a hope strong enough to endure it. That hope was what allowed me to keep writing without breaking. Then I turned to their future. I wrote that if I was gone, they should not allow my absence to become their limit. I told them to dream boldly, to think beyond fear, to remember that loss does not define destiny. I wrote that courage was not the absence of fear, that courage was choosing to act despite it, that there would be moments when their hands would shake, when their hearts would race, when doing the right thing would feel lonely. And in those moments, courage would matter more than comfort. I told them to stand for truth, even when it was unpopular, to speak for those without a voice, even when it came at a cost. I wrote that integrity mattered most when no one was watching. I told them never to be ashamed of where they came from, that Burkina Faso, the land of upright people, was their home, that Africa was their continent, that their identity was something to carry with dignity, wherever life might take them. I wrote that they were not defined by my position, that they did not need my name to matter. What mattered was who they chose to become. As I wrote these words, something unexpected happened. The fear that had been pressing on my chest began to loosen. Writing forced me to confront what truly mattered. Not power, not recognition, not survival at any cost, but faith, family, and the courage to live honestly. And then I reached the part of the letter I had been avoiding, the question I knew would follow them if I was gone, the question every child asks when they lose a parent. Why? Why did Papa take risks? Why did he not choose safety? Why did he not stay home? I knew I could not leave that unanswered. So I took a breath, and I began to write the most difficult explanation of all. I knew that question would stay with them. Why did Papa choose a path that was dangerous? Why did he not step back when things became difficult? Why did he not choose safety? I did not want others to answer that question for them. So I answered it myself. I wrote about responsibility. I wrote that loving your family does not always mean choosing the safest path. Sometimes it means choosing the path you believe will protect their future, even if it puts your present at risk. I told them that protecting them was not only about being physically present, it was also about helping to build a world where they could live with dignity. I wrote that when I looked at what was happening around me, walking away was not an option I could accept. Not because I believed I was special, not because I believed I was fearless, but because silence would have meant accepting a future I did not want for them. I was careful with my words. I did not describe enemies. I did not assign blame. I simply explained that there were moments in life when conscience speaks quietly but firmly, and when it does, ignoring it comes at a cost that lasts much longer than fear. I told them that their father was not a hero. This mattered to me. I wrote that I had doubts, that I made mistakes, that there were nights when fear kept me awake. I asked them not to place me on a pedestal if I was gone, not to turn me into a symbol. I wanted them to remember me as a man who tried, a man who loved them deeply, a man who did his best with the responsibility he was given. Then I wrote about forgiveness. This was one of the hardest parts of all. I knew that if something happened to me, anger would come naturally. Anger toward people they had never met. Anger toward systems they did not choose. Maybe even anger toward me. I urged them not to let that anger shape who they became. I wrote that holding on to hatred does not bring justice. It only creates more pain. I wrote that forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength. It is the decision not to let bitterness take control of your life. I asked them to pray for those who might harm others, not because harm is acceptable, but because cycles of violence only end when someone chooses a different path. I told them that freedom begins inside the heart. Then I wrote about responsibility again, this time theirs. I told them that growing up with opportunity would give them choices others might not have, and with those choices came responsibility. I urged them to use whatever advantages they had to help others, not to separate themselves from them, to never look down on anyone, to remember that dignity does not come from position or wealth, but from character. I wrote that they should work hard, that nothing meaningful comes easily, that my position should never replace their effort. I told them to earn their own respect, to build their own lives, to create their own legacy. I wrote that generosity mattered, that giving without expecting anything in return was one of the clearest signs of a meaningful life. I told them that how you treat people who can do nothing for you reveals who you truly are. By the time I reached the end of that section, my hand was tired, but my mind was clear. I realized something important. This letter was no longer about preparing for death. It was about preparing them for life. And there was still one more thing I needed to tell them. Something lighter, something human, something I did not want them to forget. So I kept writing. I did not want the letter to be only heavy. I did not want my children's final message from their father to be only about duty, sadi, sacrifice, and danger. So I wrote about joy. I wrote that even in difficult seasons, joy is still possible. That joy does not come from circumstances. It comes from perspective. I told them to laugh often, to find humor in ordinary days, to not take themselves too seriously. I wrote that life is too short to live constantly weighed down by fear. I encouraged them to notice the small things, good food shared with people you love, quiet mornings, sunsets that remind you the world is still beautiful, music that reaches somewhere words cannot. I wrote that these moments are gifts, and gifts are meant to be received, not rushed past. I told them to rest, not to become so consumed by work or expectations that they forget to live. That rest is not laziness, it is wisdom. That even God rested, and human beings are not stronger than that. Then I wrote about relationships. I told them to choose their friends carefully, that the people they surround themselves with would shape who they became. I urged them to seek friends who were honest, friends who challenged them to grow, friends who stayed when life became difficult. I wrote about love, about not rushing into it, about choosing partners who shared their values, who respected their faith, who would stand beside them in hard seasons, not only in easy ones. I wrote that a good marriage is one of life's greatest blessings, and a bad one can be one of its heaviest burdens. I told them to be kind to everyone, to the powerful and the powerless alike. That how you treat people who can do nothing for you reveals your true character. I wrote about legacy. I told them that true legacy is not fame. It is not wealth. It is not recognition. True legacy is the lives you touch, the love you share, the truth you stand for. I wrote that if people remembered me one day, I hoped it would not be for my position. I hoped it would be because I tried to be a good man, a faithful man, a man who loved his family and tried to make his country better in the way he believed was right. I told them something very important. I told them that they were my greatest legacy, that nothing I might achieve could ever compare to seeing them grow into people of character, people who loved God, people who loved others, people who made the world better simply by being in it. As I reached the final pages, the night was beginning to change. The darkness outside was slowly giving way to light. I had written for hours, pages filled with everything I could think to say, and still, I knew it would never be enough. Because no letter can replace a lifetime of presence. No words can substitute for the hugs I wanted to give them every day for the rest of my life. So I ended simply. I wrote that I loved them. Again, one more time. I wrote that I was proud of them, proud of who they already were, proud of who they would become. I wrote that wherever I was, whether in this life or beyond it, I would always be their father. That bond could not be broken by time, distance, or anything else. I signed my name, and beneath it, the word that mattered most, Papa. I sealed the envelope. I wrote their names on the front, and I placed it carefully inside my desk drawer. The letter was finished, but the night was not yet over. When I finished the letter, the first light of morning was beginning to appear. The night had passed. I was still there. The threat that had felt so close hours earlier was addressed by those responsible for my safety. I survived. I was able to walk out of my office, to return home, to see my children again. I held them. I kissed their foreheads. I heard them call me Papa one more time. But I was not the same man I had been the night before. Something inside me had shifted. Writing that letter forced me to face a truth I had avoided, that nothing in this life is guaranteed, that time is fragile, that love cannot wait. That letter remained in my desk drawer. I did not destroy it. Not because I expected to need it, but because the danger had not disappeared. Every day I wake up knowing that responsibility still carries risk. But now I carry something else as well, clarity. I no longer postpone the important conversations. I no longer assume I will have tomorrow to say what should be said today. I learned something that night. Love that is not expressed is incomplete. Caring without speaking leaves room for doubt. So I changed. I tell my children that I love them every single day, not only through actions, but through words. Clear words. I'm proud of you. You matter to me. You bring joy into my life. I speak about faith with them openly, about values, about what matters when everything else is stripped away. I do not wait for perfect moments. I create them. Ordinary car rides, quiet evenings, simple routines. I turn them into opportunities to plant something lasting in their hearts. Sometimes I write them short notes, small messages they will find later, reminders that their father is thinking about them, reminders that they are loved beyond measure. Because I learned something else that night. The greatest tragedy would not be death. The greatest tragedy would be leaving love unspoken. The letter in my desk represents fear, yes, but it also represents something stronger, love. And it taught me how to live differently. I'm sharing this with you for a reason. Not because my story is unique, Not because danger only belongs to people in public positions, but because uncertainty belongs to everyone. You do not need to be facing threats to understand what I felt that night. You only need to be human. Tomorrow is promised to no one. We live as if time is unlimited, as if there will always be another conversation, another phone call, another chance to say what matters. But that night taught me something clearly. If you wait for a crisis to speak the words that matter, you may be waiting too long. That letter in my desk is not only about death, it is about life. It is about choosing to speak while you still can, choosing to love openly, not silently, choosing to say today what you assume you will say tomorrow. So I want to ask you something. If tonight were your last night, what would you write? What would you want your children to know? What would you want your partner to remember? What would you want your parents to hear? Do not answer that quickly. Sit with it. Because the answer reveals what truly matters to you. You do not need a desk drawer or an envelope to begin. You only need honesty. Tell your children what you admire about them. Tell them what you hope for them. Tell them that your love is not conditional. Do not make them guess. If you have someone you love, speak clearly. Be specific. Be real. Love should never be assumed. It should be expressed. If your parents are still living, do not wait. Ask them questions. Listen to their stories. Let them know they mattered and still matter. None of us know how much time we have. Illness arrives without warning. Accidents happen in ordinary moments. Life changes in an instant. The question is not whether our time will end. The question is whether we will live fully before it does, whether we will love boldly, whether we will speak truthfully, whether we will leave no doubt in the hearts of those who matter most. I face risks, yes, but life is fragile for everyone, and the greatest peace does not come from avoiding danger. It comes from knowing that if your time ended today, your love would remain unmistakable. My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso. I am a soldier. I am a public servant. But before all of that, and beyond all of that, I am a father. A father who once sat alone at night and wrote a letter he hoped would never be read. A father who faced the possibility of not returning home. A father who learned, in the quiet hours before dawn, what truly matters. That letter is still in my desk drawer. I have not opened it since the night I sealed it. I pray that I will never have to send it. I pray that I will be present for the years ahead, for the conversations, for the guidance, for the ordinary moments that make a life meaningful. But the letter remains, not as a reminder of fear, but as a reminder of love. It reminds me that every day with my children is a gift, that every conversation is an opportunity, that every ordinary moment is sacred. It reminds me not to postpone what matters most, because leadership can wait, schedules can change, but time cannot be reclaimed. I no longer assume that there will always be another chance to say the words that matter. I say them now. I live them now. I love you. I'm proud of you. You matter. These are simple words, but they carry more weight than any title I will ever hold. If this story has stayed with you, I hope it does so for one reason, not because of who I am, but because of who you love. Do not wait for danger to teach you what matters. Do not wait for loss to make your priorities clear. Say the words now. Write the letter now. Live in a way that leaves no doubt behind. One day, all of us will be remembered not for what we controlled, but for what we gave. Not for our positions, but for our presence. Not for our power, but for our love. May you leave behind clarity, not confusion. Love, not silence. Peace, not regret. This is my testimony. This is my invitation. Go and write your own letter.